Thank you, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Rob. Rob is going to explain to us how influencing people still matters, if it does. So let's start right there. Does winning friends and influencing people still matter?
Well, let me ask everyone here. How many of you are 35 years or older? Okay. Those of us 35 years and older grew up with the media as a destination. I think you'd agree. We sought out the news. We sought out the evening news. We went to CNN. We sought out the newspaper or the magazine. It was a destination. Now, I think the new definition of news is something important enough to find me. Isn't that true? Think about how many tragic situations we've had in the last 6 months. How did you find out about them? You didn't find out about them because I was watching the evening news. It landed on your phone. The most important currency today is sharing, information sharing. And if you look at the research related to does influence and friends matter, right at the top in the advertising credibility research by Nielsen, #1 most credible source, a recommendation from a friend. What's #2? Another consumer's opinion online. Think about TripAdvisor, Yelp. #3, actually branded content shared by a friend. And #4 is an editorial side of the media story, a story on the non-advertising side. And then it begins to go down, no offense to people in the paid media business, because we do that too. It goes down to 20% lower in credibility for television, news, radio, and outdoor advertising, and it goes down further for trust and credibility of banner ads and mobile ads. So, do having friends and influence matter? You better believe it, because the new currency is the human channel. And getting to them is more difficult and complex than ever.
So at least ink-stained wretches like myself are still above TV?
No, because you've adapted to the, you know what matters from The Economist is something sent to you, right? Something that takes off like a rocket, and I send your stuff all the time, and I don't read it in print.
Right.
We had one CEO of a client say, well, that story wasn't even in the print edition of the Wall Street Journal. Like, well, have you looked at the demographics of the print edition of the Journal? It's about north of 65-year-olds. If you're a tech company, you want to get everyone who happens to be reading it on their device. So there's a huge future for real journalism, but it's going to be ported to you by a friend.
All right, so given that about how people learn information these days, how has the science of influencing people then changed from your perspective?
Yeah, the communications business writ large has been dominated by liberal arts majors who are very creative and great writers and great visual artists. Now, I always say to my folks at Ketchum, find your inner math geek, because in the very near future, and in some cases already, people are coming into work and looking at a dashboard of how well they did overnight. Dial it up, dial it down based on analytics. We have 4 or 5 analytics units now at our firm, and the hottest jobs and the coolest people in the firm are the data geeks. That's a big change from 5 years ago or 10 years ago. So what we've done is we've brought in a number of startups and companies in the analytics space, social listening, and influencer marketing, and we're using them all the time. 3 or 4 of them are artificial intelligence enabled already, Tagger Media, Tap Influence, and Tracker. We did a global RFP. We looked at 40 companies, did 22 RFPs. We picked those 3. And for social listening and media monitoring and staying out ahead of issues, we use Brandwatch and Signal Labs.
Right.
And they've stood the test of time, meaning for the past 2 years, because things are constantly changing.
Right. Okay, so the science will continue to change. What about the art of influencing people?
Yeah, so they tell those of us on the earned side of the media in public relations, I call it integrated communications, that we are storytellers, we always have been, and we always will be. That, fortunately, is true. The skill that we have of news judgment, of storytelling, is incredibly valuable for all of you in marketing, and it always will be. But I'd ask you to think about this. Rather than think of it as a one-way model of storytelling, please think of it as story making. The CMO of MasterCard, Raja Rajamanar, kind of coined that term a few years ago, story making. You know what it means. Co-creating the story. The story that your superfan, your consumer, makes about your brand is far more powerful than the story you tell about your brand. Brands have traditionally been far too egocentric. And I'd say the paid media world is still intensely interested in talking about their brand. Those of you who now are looking at it not from my supply of information, but from the demand side of news and information and branding, the demand side, that to me means the demand is the conversation that's going on. Right here at Web Summit, there are amazing conversations going on. Find a way for your brand to be part of that conversation, to fuel that conversation and make your marketing a service that's of value instead of always talking about yourself. So, story making. If you're making a story with the consumer, the first thing you have to do is listen, which is why we have all these listening platforms. Can I give a few examples?
Sure, go ahead.
From the simple and almost free. Here's one. Thanksgiving, okay? Not everyone in the crowd celebrates Thanksgiving, but you know what it is. If you sell products for Thanksgiving, your window to win is right now, from November 1st until Thanksgiving. We have a client, stovetop stuffing. You remember it, right?
Yeah.
That makes the stuffing that goes in the turkey. You want to make news around that. You can advertise all you want, but if this happens to you, it's worth a lot more. This had a huge impact on sales 1 year ago. A grandma sends a text to her teenage grandson that says, are you definitely coming for Thanksgiving dinner? And the teenager writes back, I'm not your grandson, but can I still come? And the grandma writes back, absolutely, we'd love to have you. Now this guy's friend thinks it would be funny to take a screen grab of that exchange with the grandma's text phone number and posts it to his thousands of followers on all of his channels. Funny. 600 teenagers by the end of the day had invited themselves to Thanksgiving dinner at her house. So what do? We see this as a brand, stovetop stuffing. We quickly reach out to her and say, we got you covered. We'll cover the meal for whoever shows up. We'll send you a year's supply of stovetop. And the thing ends up just like so much does now. Start small on social, becomes huge on social. Everyone shares it. And then it switches over to traditional mainstream media. Millions and millions of people saw that story because it landed on every morning show and every late night talk show, and it was the heartwarming story of Thanksgiving. Where did it start? With something that really happened on the supply side of news.
Right. So that's a great story. And of course, what people are going to think, cynics are going to think when they see that, is how do I know that was real? Authenticity is a big part of what you're talking about.
Yeah.
How do you ensure that or convey that?
Well, I love that question. We live in the world of the earned side of news. We've always worried about getting busted for not being authentic.
Right.
It strikes me that a lot, ad agencies get around that more easily than we do. Real people, not actors, until you find out they were SAG-AFTRA and they auditioned for the part.
Right.
We've always been terrified of, that it wasn't real, and we stick with that. You get busted. Incentivized influencers are banned by Amazon. You can check back to the IP address to find out if someone sent that for real. We live in a transparent world. We love the transparency of it. So we don't do that stuff because it's never going to be sustainable.
Right. Interesting. Now let's talk about another kind of hidden artifice, or an artificial factor in generating audience, which is algorithms. What role do you think they should play, and do you think they should be regulated? I mean, algorithms are becoming increasingly, of course, influential for us.
I got to tell you, I think we could all look at this through two lenses. One is as marketers, or whatever business you're in. Algorithms and AI are God's gift to marketers and people who are trying to do a data-driven business. It's amazing. But in our field, we try to put ourselves on the side of the consumer as much as on the side of the brand. And if I'm thinking through the lens of consumer protection, and if I'm thinking as a citizen, I think a lot has to be done to increase the transparency. The vast majority of people have no idea how much is going on behind the scenes, selecting what they see, and steering what they see on any given day. Algorithms, I'm a big fan of them in the world of marketing, but you have to admit they fuel polarization, they fuel groupthink, they are the engine of fake news because people opt in to see things that fulfill their confirmation bias. Now, I'm not in favor of regulation. Right here in Lisbon at Web Summit, you have to say this is the capital of market-based solutions. The companies here are solving problems that hadn't been solved before. If inflation is high and people are paying way too much for goods, Amazon is invented. If you can't get a cab when you want one and it's too expensive, Uber is invented. I did the mentoring over there in the other pavilion today with 4 startups and speed dating, 20 minutes apiece. I was blown away by how much they're going to disintermediate the traditional companies. That's a market-based solution to this problem. I would even say that Uber to me is a good example of transparency because you know you're rated, you know that there is GPS following you, and you can see the car approaching you. So we have to make all of that more transparent or it will be regulated, and I'll predict within the next 2 years there will be a National Information Transparency Act enacted by legislations around the world if there isn't a market-based solution to the opacity of algorithms and behind-the-scene marketing.
The dominance of platforms, though, does make that a little bit tricky, right? I mean, the algorithms in the hands of just a few powerful platforms where most of the audience globally is concentrated, either whether it's e-commerce, social, or search, they're going to resist, obviously those platforms are resisting regulation already. They change their algorithms every day, maybe every hour, every minute. How can you be transparent in that kind of fast-changing environment? I mean, what is the marketplace way of making that work? I think it's quite worrying to leave it to the market, isn't it?
Well, you know what? I mean, look, what is Reddit? It's a vote up and down kind of story platform. Right. We could have credibility ledgers. We could have third parties, independent third parties do it, or we could have the crowd do it. Okay. The crowd could say, I trust the source of this, and cumulatively you'd get a credibility score. I would suggest that's going to happen because through the course of history, if you go back to Ralph Nader's Unsafe at Any Speed, that brought about massive changes in car safety. If you go back to the slaughterhouses and child labor of the turn of the last century, that led to the Pure Food and Drug Act, the formation of the FDA and the health services in all the other countries.
Regulations.
If protections are not put in place related to the new world we live in of algorithms, regulation will follow, and it's much better to have a market-based solution.
Well, we'll see if the market is able to come up with that. Perhaps you can help. Rob Flaherty, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for listening. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.